Warning: the events described in this story are completely fictitious. This is where truth dances with shadows. Throughout the series, the court will hear the public accusations that some people have made about current events and what happened. But beware, it's all a work of fiction. And remember, you will choose the heroes of the next series. A few hours before the trial began, in a dark corner of the courthouse, in a secluded, dusty room, Prosecutor John F. Kennedy paced back and forth in the existential throes of his resurrection. The lines on his face reflected not the weight of years, but the confusion of the few weeks since his resurrection. He was dead, he knew it. It was over when that bullet pierced his skull in Dallas on November 22, 1963. But now he was here, breathing, thinking, feeling. And why? The purpose of the dark forces that resurrected him was to complete this great investigation against Trump, Elon Musk, and J.D. Vance. But the restlessness inside him was growing day by day, eating away at his soul like a tumor. Was his resurrection a miracle or a curse? The answer to this question enveloped his mind like a labyrinth, causing him to get more and more lost with every step. The dim light of the room revealed cracks and cobwebs in the wall. Kennedy's shadow was reflected on the wall in the dance of a flickering candle flame, moving as if she were a ghost questioning her own existence. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the sensation of being trapped inside a body she did not understand. "Am I still me?" he muttered to himself, his voice echoing off the cold stone walls of the room as if he were someone else. He knew he was a prosecutor, but this body of resurrection, was familiar and yet alien at the same time. His heart was beating. Yes, but did this heart really belong to him? The door creaked open slightly, and Caroline Leavitt entered. She was dressed in a dark, formal outfit. Her black suit, with its sharp lines, looked like armor. But there was a coldness in her eyes that spoke of more than just an ordinary counselor. His gaze had the calmness of a hunter watching his prey, determined, calculating, and ruthless. His hair was pulled back in a tight bun, not a single strand out of place, betraying his obsession with control. This detail caught Kennedy's eye. Caroline's every move, every gesture seemed pre-planned, as if on a theater stage. "President Kennedy, or ex-president, new Prosecutor Kennedy," said Caroline, her smile carrying a false warmth. Her lips were curled, but her eyes were not smiling. It was a sign of a threat hidden under a mask. "You know what you have to do in court today, don't you?" His voice was soft, but the underlying tone was a warning that the consequences of failing to obey an order would be severe. Kennedy sighed, a deep, tired sigh. "I know why they brought me back, Caroline," he said, a note of desperation in his voice. "But I'm still not sure. Do I really have to destroy these people? Trump, Musk, Vance." These names had been running through her mind since she was resurrected. He didn't even know them, at least not personally. But Caroline and the shadows behind her had kept telling him that the trio were a threat, spreading like a virus that would destroy the American dream. Kennedy was confused. Why did he, a man who had once made speeches to unite his country, now have to be a divider? Caroline bowed her head slightly, no more than an ambassador hidden in the shadows. Her expression did not change, but for a moment there was a spark in her eyes. Whether it was impatience, anger, or just contempt, Kennedy could not tell. "This is a mission," Caroline said, her voice sterner now. "You can't waste the second chance you've been given. If you don't convict them today, as planned in court, the consequences could be bad for everyone, especially for you." This last sentence hung in the air, sharp and threatening like a knife. Kennedy's hair stood on end. Caroline's words were more like a prophecy than a warning. Kennedy slumped into a wooden chair, the only chair in the room. She pressed her hands to her temples, her fingers disappearing into her hair. "Who are the people who resurrected me, Caroline?" he asked, his voice shaky but determined. "Are they really human?" This question had haunted her since her resurrection. She couldn't sleep at night. She stared at the ceiling in the dark and pondered this unknown. Those who brought him back were too powerful to be human, but just as mysterious. Was it technology or something darker? Kennedy, a leader who had once dreamed of reaching space, now questioned the limits of his own existence. Caroline smiled slightly, but it was not a smile of warmth, but part of a riddle. "Some things are useless for you to know," she said, a hint of sarcasm in her voice. "Your mission is clear. You have to indict Trump, Musk, and Vance. The tribunal will listen to you. They believe in an American myth." This last sentence weighed heavily on Kennedy's chest. The American myth. It once was, yes. But what was it now? Kennedy took a deep breath. His chest felt tight. "What if I don't accept?" he asked, his voice weak but with a spark of rebellion in it. Maybe she still had a problem. Maybe she didn't have to be part of this dark game. The smile disappeared from Caroline's face. She took out a small piece of notepaper from her bag and put it on the table. The paper slid slightly across the rough surface of the table and stopped in front of Kennedy. "Read this," Caroline said, her voice now completely emotionless. "Then decide." Kennedy picked up the paper with trembling hands. There was a single sentence in small, neat handwriting. "Not only do we control you, we control your family." His eyes widened, his breath caught. Jackie, Caroline, John Jr., were they in this game too? Were they under threat too? Kennedy's mind blurred. His family had always been his greatest weakness. Tears welled up in his eyes, but they did not flow. Instead, an anger welled up inside her, but she couldn't tell if it was at Caroline, at those who had resurrected her, or at her own helplessness. Caroline watched Kennedy's face change, but said nothing. She quietly left the room, closing the door slightly and leaving Kennedy alone with her thoughts. Kennedy clenched the paper into a fist. Now he had to make a choice. But was it really a choice, or was it a fate already written? Hours later, the tension in the courtroom was at its height. The air was heavy, as if an invisible fog had enveloped the room. Trump, Musk, and J.D. Vance sat in the dock. Trump had his usual confident expression on his face, but there was a hint of unease in his eyes. His hands were clasped tightly on the table. Elon Musk sat next to him, his head slightly tilted forward, but his eyes scanning the surroundings, as if trying to solve this situation as if it were an engineering problem. J.D. Vance sat up straight, his jaw clenched, his gaze sharp, ready as a soldier, but not quite sure what he was up against. All three were trying to hide what they were feeling behind the expressionless masks on their faces, but everyone in the courtroom knew that this case was no ordinary matter of law. There stood Kennedy, a historical figure, a shadow. But at the same time as the prosecutor, he was scrutinizing them intently. The presiding judge, George Washington, banged the gavel on the table. The noise echoed through the courtroom, and the whispering stopped abruptly. "Mr. Justice John F. Kennedy, we hear you," he said, his voice deep and determined. Kennedy stood up. He walked slowly to the podium, each step feeling as if he were carrying a chain. The eyes in the hall were locked on him, including those of Trump, Musk, Vance. Kennedy tried to understand what she saw in their eyes. Was it anger, fear, or just curiosity? Caroline sat in the back row of the courtroom. Dressed in black, she seemed to disappear into the shadows, but Kennedy felt her presence. Her eyes were as cold as ice, and as she looked at Kennedy, she was giving him a single message: speak, or it's all over. Kennedy stood in front of the microphone, and silence fell over the room. His hands gripped the edge of the lectern tightly, squeezing until his fingers turned white. He remembered Caroline's instructions. He was to denounce Trump as a charismatic but dangerous demagogue, Musk as an uncontrolled genius, and Vance as a secret conspirator. If he spoke his way, the trio would be condemned forever. But if he didn't, his family, the threat in that note, the whole thing could collapse. He took a deep breath. His chest was tightening. His heart was racing. And before he said his first word, there was only one question echoing in his head: which side am I really on? He was once a leader who had fought to unite his country. Was he now to be used as a puppet? His mind was a battlefield. His conscience, fear, and anger were colliding with each other. The silence in the hall was deafening. And then his lips parted. To be continued.